ESPN 105.9 The Zone, the Out of Bounds Show, driven by your next John Deere tractor, Mississippi Ag. 16 locations in the state of Mississippi and Arkansas. Visit agup.com. Find the retail location nearest you, agup.com. We welcome in our friend Tom Luginbill. Lugs or Mongoose, depending on what all is happening. He joins us on the Coors Light guest line. National college football analyst with ESPN and has also headed up ESPN's recruiting for a decade plus. We're going to talk a little NFL draft, SEC players to the NFL, and we've got some great numbers to throw out at Lugs, which, by the way, he does not have in front of him, so this will be fun. Lugs, good morning, buddy. How are you?
I'm good, buddy. How are you holding up? Everybody well with the family and happy and safe?
We are. Y'all hanging in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're fortunate to have jobs I can work from home and, plenty of recruiting work to do. So very thankful for that.
Yeah, there's been a lot going on in recruiting just in the last week. So, Tom, we broke down the 2000s SEC players drafted in the NFL. The first 10 drafts, second 10 drafts, right? And
all right.
Every single team had more NFL players this last 10 years than the first 10 of this century, except one. Which team do you think went backwards? Oh, by the way, we counted Missouri and A&M's from 2000 on, even though they joined in 2012, Luke. So which team out of 14 went backwards the last 10 NFL drafts compared to the first of this century?
Out of the SEC?
Yeah.
Tennessee.
Oh, my gosh. You nailed it.
Is that it?
Yes. Yeah. How about this? 55. Okay, 55 from 2000 to 2009 players drafted out of Knoxville. 2010 to a couple of weeks ago, 27, Luke's.
Wow. And I'll tell you the interesting thing, if you dug even deeper in that, is, and you looked at where those kids are from, where those draftees are from, in relationship to in-state or out-of-state between the two decades, I bet that would reveal some interesting numbers as well.
Yes.
So get to work, Blake.
Tom Luginbill, ESPN on the Coors Light guest line. Okay. I want you to, that Mullen sent more players to the NFL than Sherrill/Croom. I want you to guess how many more the last 10 drafts. I'm still giving Mullen credit even for a few weeks ago because he recruited Willie Gay and several others. MSU had 5 guys. Blake, did you tell me 4 or 5? Five guys drafted in the NFL draft. Wasn't as top heavy, but they still had a lot of dudes drafted. If you would just guess a number of what the increase from Sherrill/Croom to Dan, Luke.
So the Sherrill/Croom years combined, what were they? Give me those again.
17.
So 17 years.
No. I'm sorry, 17 players, 2000 to 2009.
No. I understand that. Oh, okay. So that's not really. Is that Croom and Sherrill combined? But Sherrill was there longer than that, wasn't he?
Yeah, but I'm not counting the 90s. I'm just counting.
Okay,
we're just
so
going by the 2000s. Yeah.
And they had 17 guys drafted in that from 2000 to 2009, and then between 2010 to now.
Right.
Oh, close to double.
Yep, 36.
There you go.
So I have peppered you with questions the last, you've been on, 6 years, okay? I've hammered you with the difference in MSU and Ole Miss and then comparing them to who mirrors what and who emulates this and that, just to drill down because we're all fascinated by recruiting and by development and culture and all the fun stuff that we talk about. So now that you know, all right, 36 players, and a lot of those were drafted in the first, second, and third round of the draft.
I can tell you
how many?
17 players in the first, second, or third round. 46% of the 37 picks
Okay, 46.
were top 3 rounds.
That was not the, as you know, the pattern prior to Dan. Now that we've got an even bigger, right, case study here, sample size, than even when I started trying to mine what you thought about this program several years ago. I think this is, it's pretty remarkable, Luke. As someone who has covered recruiting and headed it up for over a decade, what's your takeaway on 17 players over 10 years to 36 players, and how many of them were drafted in the first 3 rounds?
A couple of things. Player development and the fact that winning attracts better players. So your ability to recruit better players is a reflection of more success on the field, and then vice versa throughout the process. So if you all of a sudden are viewed differently because instead of being a 6-win team or 5-win team, you're an 8 or 9-win team, better players are going to be attracted to your program. You're going to have more access to better players. Doesn't mean that you're still going to slow down on the development side, but the players that are coming into your program are better acclimated and better prepared, and then along with the development, over the course of time, you're going to have more production, which is going to lead to more wins. And so to me, I think the other thing, if you really peeled back the layers and took this another step, and I don't know, Blake, if you've done this, I'd be curious to know, of those 36 players, what are the positions that are most prominent? I'd be willing to guess I know the answer.
I think you do.
What are the positions that are most prominent? And then you would see a correlation between wins and draft status.
Yeah. And I think where people miss with Mullen, we're visiting with Tom Luginbill on the Coors Light guest line, and Dan really hammered it home in like the first few weeks he was hired. But everybody labeled Dan offense, and he kept saying, if I win here, we'll win on defense. Because I think he knew location-wise, and you know this, Tom, because you evaluate all these players, he knew where location-wise, where he was, that he could go get dudes that could run and hit at the front line and defensive line linebackers and secondary players. And I think where you're going is the overwhelming majority of those players are defensive players, Luke.
Defensive players and probably players up front, or
Yep.
at least within the front 7, outside of a corner here or there. But you're going to see guys, and that, to be honest with you, that's going to be a true reflection of every draftable player in the last 10 years in the SEC. When you look at the positions that were highest ranked, that were highly drafted, they're going to be in the offensive line, the defensive line, probably going to be at quarterback, and are going to be at defensive corner. That's where you're going to see the highest rated players that were on people's draft boards out of that conference, which is why the conference has won more championships than everybody else.
Tom Luginbill on ESPN 105.9 The Zone, talking recruiting, development, SEC players, and SEC players in the 2000s going to the NFL. I'm going to throw out another number to you. Okay, so MSU has had 36 players drafted in the last 10 drafts. A&M has had 36 players drafted to the NFL in the last 10 drafts. So a school that's in Texas, a lot more money. Top 12 to 15 recruiter, and obviously Jimbo's moved it up, as you well know, in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
What's your initial reaction to those numbers between MSU and A&M?
Texas produces too many finished products that are the same player when they're a redshirt junior as they were when they were a true freshman. And I think that's one of the differences between a Mississippi State is the player or the athlete they're getting is more raw. Maybe he's not as college ready to step on the field right away, but he has more upside and a higher ceiling to be more productive over the course of 4 to 5 years. I think what the danger in recruiting the state of the state of Texas is, on average, you're going to see about 375 kids in every recruiting cycle, 375 that will sign an FBS letter of intent, not FCS. We're talking Group of 5 and Power 5 schools, 375 kids. But the danger in that state is there's a lot of eye candy. There's a lot of kids that look the part, that are mature, that are physically advanced. Well, yeah, they've been training in one sport since they could probably play organized football. They've got resources that other states don't have. The problem is that guy's easy to take, but that guy may not be any different when he's a junior or senior than he was when he came into your program. And those are the guys that you've got to be very, very careful and stay away from, because they're not going to get you any better. I think that's the difference between a Mississippi State and a Texas A&M.
How about that? Tom Luginbill, National College Football Analyst, ESPN, leading ESPN's recruiting for over a decade, and he joins us on the Coors Light guest line. Okay, I've got another number for you.
All right.
First-round picks in the 2000s. Total, 2000 to just a few weeks ago. All right. Auburn's had 10. A&M's had 11 first-round picks.
This is since 2000?
Yes.
Okay.
So Auburn 10, A&M, I'm not even sure what to do with this. I'll be interested to see what you think. Auburn 10, A&M 11, Ole Miss 10, and Mizzou 9. So they're all right there stacked together. Your thoughts?
Missouri had 9 first-round draft choices in a 20-year span?
That's what I said.
Interesting. First-rounders. That's surprising. That's probably the one that would stand out as the biggest surprise. Interesting. I would that one really surprises me. Now, outside of 2 defensive linemen from that place, I'm trying to think of what positions would have been first rounders out of that program.
Quarterback. I can't remember the dude.
Yeah, Blake. Or no, what's his name? The kid.
Gay. He flamed out pretty quick, unfortunately.
Drew
went to
Lock
Jacksonville.
up there, wasn't he? No, he dropped.
He went to.
No.
Well, yeah, he got Drew Lock as well.
He went to Jacksonville. That Lugs is right on that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, he went to Jacksonville. So you had a couple quarterbacks. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting.
Pinkle was, but you've said this before years ago. Pinkle was a freak.
Blaine Gabbert.
Couldn't pull it.
That's what his name was. Yeah. Well, where Pinkle did such a good job and it's such a different recruiting landscape in that conference, because the struggle for a team like Missouri in the SEC is you got to have front people to really, really run the race. I mean, if you're going to compete and get to Atlanta, you got to have them. In the Big 12, you don't necessarily have to have them. You can win scoring races, and if you have good quarterback play and good weapons, you can be in every game every week. And they recruited Texas really, really well during his time in Missouri.
Yeah. Tom
Hey, by the
Luginbill.
way, real quick, in all of this discussion, and Blake, I don't know if you've done this, and I don't know if we've discussed it because we do this as part of our studies, is looking at the U.S. national consensus, and it's done every 4 years. So you can see, total population per capita. You can see demographic of race and ethnic background. And, we get this quote-unquote SEC bias on a national scale, particularly from those on the West Coast. Pac-12 fans, you guys are undervaluing us. It's the state of California. It's got 38 million people. And my response to that is, okay, yes, you have 38 million people, but that's not a 38 million football playing population. Almost 55% of that 38 million people is of Hispanic or Asian background. Guess which 2 groups don't play football traditionally? Right. So you can remove that out of the equation. Now, all of a sudden, you're taking that 38 million, you're cutting it in half. So, and I've long, over the last 4 to 5 years, I've felt firmly about this. You can take the just under 12 million people in the state of Georgia, and I would make a very, very fair and firm argument that the state of Georgia has outpaced California in terms of top-level football talent.
I agree. Yeah, no doubt. Well, you know the numbers more than we do. But yes, Tom Luginbill on the Coors Light guest line. And I think that out west, they'll continue to see their numbers decrease because of
you're not having as much participation in football either.
No.
You're having more and more kids not playing football. So
right.
that's going to have a big impact too.
I think some of it's CTE driven and other things and ideology and whatnot. And
Sure.
and here, I mean, kids are going to play, and in some other pockets, Midwest and so on. And then I just think you're going to have a decrease in number. And there's always a finite amount of talent anyway. So it's going to be interesting to see what this looks like 7 to 10 years from now. Tom Luginbill,
Sure.
national college football analyst on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Okay, Tom, so we went over MSU has had 36 players drafted in the last 10 drafts. A&M has had 36 players drafted in the last 10 drafts. So has Arkansas, and they've been awful. Does that surprise, for the most part, other than Petrino there for a second at the very, very beginning of the drafts that I'm referencing the last 10 years, and Bielema and Pittman and I guess some others did a good job in the trenches. What's your takeaway on Arkansas having – let me give you an example. Ole Miss, now they've been top-heavy. They've had some absolute studs. But Ole Miss in the last 10 drafts has had 26 players drafted. Arkansas's had 36. What do you make of that?
That the drafted players were in rounds 5 through 7 predominantly.
Yeah.
And very few were in the first 2 to 3 rounds that played in the defensive line.
True.
That would be my guess without knowing the specifics.
Yeah. But does that still surprise you? 36 players from Arkansas?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. I mean, they went through that run, if you remember. Now, you're talking about the last 20 years, or are you talking about the last 10?
No, I'm just talking about the last 10. For Arkansas.
That surprises me. That's a bigger number because now you're not including Felix Jones and Darren McFadden.
Right.
And Peyton Hillis, and you're not including well, let's see, would that include that wouldn't include Ryan Mallett? I'm trying to think. So that number is pretty surprising, but I bet it correlates with where they're slotted in the positions they play.
Okay, here's a weird one. So Arkansas's 36, Mississippi State's 36. Auburn in the last 10 drafts, 40. See, to me, I would think in the first 10 of this century, they had 36 players drafted. One, I thought Tubbs would have had more. I know he didn't do the whole thing. Chiswick came in a little bit later. But the last 10 years, Auburn's had 40 players drafted. I would have thought, because they've had some pretty damn good teams, Lugs. And you know what they do. They go into Atlanta. They go into North Florida. They go into the Panhandle. And, of course, they sign good players in the state of Alabama, too. Saban doesn't get all of them. Does that number surprise you, Auburn, the last 10 years, 40 players?
No, not really. But I bet you a lot of those players are upfront players on both sides of the ball, and running backs and defensive backs. If I were to garner a guess. Now, obviously, we're including Cam Newton. We're including Jarrett Stidham. Trying to think of who else would have been thrown in there. Nick Marshall ended up getting drafted, but I don't know. Did you think that number would be higher?
I did, and let me throw something out. You know where they've missed, which is you may not be surprised because of the offense that Malzahn runs, and he's got the bulk of these drafts, but Chiswick had some. Wide receiver. Ole Miss has been really good. Bama and LSU, as you know, have been great. There's been some other teams.
Auburn's had serviceable guys.
Right.
They've had just 2 receivers drafted the last 10 years, a 4th rounder and a 5th rounder.
There you go.
Sammy Coates and who else?
Let's see. I've got Darius Slayton was a 5th-round pick in 2019, and then Ricardo Lewis was a 4th-round pick in 2016.
Oh, Ricardo Lewis. Okay.
Yeah, and then you have to go back even farther. You get out of the 2010s.
Wow.
Sammy Coates wasn't drafted?
I don't see him on this NFL draft list.
Maybe he wasn't.
Oh, excuse me, 3. No, you're right. He was a 3rd rounder in 2015. I apologize.
Bam.
There we go.
That's why we pay you the big bucks. So 3 receivers in 10 years.
Blake, don't make me come in there and start working some spreadsheets.
Please, between you and Dave Bartu, I've got 2 nerds on either side of me pulling me 2 directions.
And what Luke's doesn't realize is we've got a full cooler of Coors Light over there right across from the studio.
We can sit 6 feet away, Tom.
That makes me so mad. I still have my out of bounds stogies that keep me sane through all of this.
Bam. Yeah, my cigar consumption has gone way up in the last during the pandemic.
Good. It's good, but it's not good.
Right. All right, we've only got a couple more minutes for Tom. Do you want to wrap it up with one question?
I want to ask you a question quick. Cool. All right, so Tom, obviously LSU, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi State have had the biggest jumps from first 10 years to second 10 years.
Yeah.
Alabama went from 35 drafted players in the first 10 years to 93 in the last 10 years. I mean, that's whatever. It's crazy talk. But when you look at Florida, they went from 51 in the first 10 years to 66 in the second 10 years. And that includes McElwain and Muschamp basically burying their heads in the sand for 6 seasons combined. Can you talk, what? That's a 15-player jump, and it's like Mullen's really not even been there. Kind of how did Urban not have either more? I mean, that was good for third in the league for that 10-year stretch. 51 in the first 10 years. That was good for third in the league. But
it's a little bit of Spurrier and Zook.
Yeah,
but
a lot of Urban.
Yeah. Right.
I'm surprised that it's so much bigger in the next 10.
We got a minute and a half.
A lot of those Urban players, too, remember, would have been drafted in that last 10 without him being there.
That's right.
Because he would have recruited and signed a lot of those guys. But
That's
here's what you got to also remember, which is so surprising, is how many great players has Florida had on defense, even during some of those down years? I mean, we forget that Will Muschamp still had a 12-1 season there at one time. If think about if Will Greer doesn't get hurt at Florida or doesn't have the steroid thing at Florida, all of those great defensive players, the running backs, the receivers they just got screwed up at quarterback. So if Will Greer doesn't get hurt, now all of a sudden we might have because remember, they went to Atlanta 2 years in a row. So they still had great players, but offensively,
that's a good point.
Between Will Muschamp and McElwain, couldn't seem to get something consistently going. But boy, on defense and some of their other skill spots, they've always had great players.
Well, and Lugs, as you said, I don't know what it was, 4 or 5 years ago, if they would have figured out, like I think Mullen would have, had he been there, if they'd have figured out what to do with Driscoll, who is a freak athlete who you were very impressed with.
He's still in the NFL.
Right. I mean, he goes to La Tech and wore some people out without as many dudes around him.
Crazy.
I know. But Greer and Driscoll could have totally changed the trajectory of that program. And, I mean, even more so. All right, buddy. We could do it for another 30 minutes to an hour, but we're wrapping up the show. It's great to hear from you, hear your voice. Hope you're doing well, and thanks for your time today, bud.
You too. Take care, guys. Really enjoyed it today.
See you, man. Tom Luginbill, Lugs, on the Coors Light guest line. National College Football Analyst, ESPN. That was fun. The show is brought to you by Kessler Prime. They're open tonight. Kessler Prime in the Renaissance is open. Beagle Bagel Cafe is open. Mudbugs is slinging. I'll have to talk to Matt when he's going to open. Mudbugs is open. Go to Facebook for all those. Mudbugs, they're open for curbside and to go. We'll check on the rest. 2 locations in Rankin County. Thanks for listening to the Out of Bounds Show presented by Kessler Prime and Mudbugs. And we'll check on Georgia Blue and all of our other local restaurant friends.